Hello everyone, welcome to Love Family Web 4, and in today's class we'll be looking at CSS grid. Alright, just a table of content before we get going. We're looking at some basic concepts, including the grid container and grid items, grid lines, tracks and cells and grid areas. Then we'll jump into creating a grid, how to create a grid to define the rows and column, and how to use our grid template rows, grid template columns, and also the FR units. And then we'll be looking at placing items using our grid column and grid row. Also look at spanning of items across rows and columns, grid areas and templates, and then go row gap and column gap. All right, so for the basic concept, what is your grid container and your grid items? So this works basically just like your flex box, where you have your flex box container and the flex items. So in this case, your grid container is the parent element that holds the grid, and you create it by setting a display of grid or display inline grid, while the grid items are the direct children of the grid container. Just like I said, it works just like Flexbox. You have the container, and then you have the children or the grid items. So we also have our grid lines, the dividing lines that make up the grid, numbered from starting from 1. Also have our grid tracks, the space between two grid lines, the rows and the columns, and then we have our grid cell. So let's look at an example I already made. All right, so here is a HTML for this. We have our grid container with 8 different items inside, item 1 down to item 8. And then we'll have just some basic styling here, just to add the background coloring for this and your grid container. So in this case, here is a grid container box that is housing all of your other grid items. Next, we'll be looking at how to create a grid. So we already said we use a display of grid, and then we use our grid template rows and grid template columns to define the sizes of the rows and the column, just like we see here. A display of grid and then grid template column, grid template rows. Now notice when I define a display of grid, nothing happens. That's because I will have to define what I want to happen inside of this grid. So I come here and I say grid template columns. I can decide to give it 3 columns, say 200 pixels each. Let's say 150. And once I save this, we now have 3 different columns. First one 200 pixel, second one 200 pixel, and the third one 150 pixel. Now notice one thing with CSS grid is that it always kind of distributes the grid template rows dynamically. So you would almost never have to define your grid template rows, unless you're probably working with more complex layouts, and then you will have to define your grid rows and stuff. But in an ideal world where you just have to define your grid template columns, and then the rows will align just by itself. So we can also can decide here to have a grid template row if we want, but the items are usually distributed to fit in rows. So we can say, let's say 150 pixel. Now if we give this 4 rows, so right now we have 4 different rows, but our items does not span into 4 rows. It only spans into 3 rows. So we don't really have to define this, unless probably we want a kind of styling on our CSS row, or on our grid row rather. Then we'll define our grid template rows. But CSS always works in a way that distributes your items into the rows that is available, or that can carry the items that are available. Next, we'll be looking at the FR unit. So the FR unit, or the fractional unit, represents a fraction of the available space in the container. So instead of defining this to be 200 pixels, 200 pixels, and 150 pixels, we can decide to give it fractional units. 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR. I'll save this. Now notice how it just opens up to fill up the space. So it's just like saying, let's give it this fractional unit of the available space inside of this grid container. So we can decide to say 2FR. Now notice we now have 4 different rows because I already defined the rows with the consistent styling, but we're just going to take this out. Let's get rid of this. And it's still the same 4 rows and evenly distributed. So 1FR, 1FR also works with fractional units. 1FR, let's make it 3. Now something we can do, there's a syntax for this to make it easier. We can use the repeats. Then we can say 3, 1FR, and it works the same way. So that's how to define the fractional unit for your CSS grid. Let's not forget it represents a fraction of the available space in the container, and just makes it to fit in dynamically instead of having to just declare 200 pixels, 300 pixels. So using the fractional units is a better practice. So let's also look at placing items using our grid columns and our grid rows. So before we do that, let's turn on our developer mode here. All right, so this was the grid lines we talked about earlier, starting from 1 down to 4, and then -4 down to -1, and just 1, 2, 3, and then so we're looking at placing our items. Now, this works with the particular item you want to place. So in this case, let's work with item 1. So we can say grid, sorry. Now, this is the syntax how it works. You can say 1. So we want our item 1 to start from the column, start from number 1, and then to end in 3. We'll say 1/3. And notice how our item now spans from the first line down to the third line. Now, what this basically means is just 2 syntax here. It represents grid column starts and your grid column end. So let's get rid of this. So we can say our grid column start is 1, and we can call it grid column end is 3. Brings out the same result. So that's basically what this means when you say grid column. It's saying a grid column start and grid column end. So that's just like a shorthand of writing both grid column start and grid column end. So we want this to start at the first line, then end in the third line of our column. So that spans there. And also decide to work with the grid row and say You can say we want to start from the first line down to, let's see, let's get rid of this. So, our layouts can look good. So I want to start from the first line. Okay, back to default. We want this to start from the first line and end in line number 3. So we can say, and notice how this has spanned down here. All right, so let's get rid of this, and then let's play around with our item 6. Let's see. You can say grid column, or let's say grid column. Let's say we want to start from number 2 and then the number 4. So now notice the item has spanned right from number 2 here all the way to number 4. Now we have already messed up our layout, but this is what you use your item placing for, to just play around with your layouts. So we can get rid of this and save that. Okay, now we'll be looking at spanning of items. In CSS grid, grid column and grid row properties allows items to span multiple columns or rows. So this is the syntax. You have your grid column and then span 2. So this makes the item to take up 2 columns instead of 1. So we have our item 6 here. We can just say and then it takes up 2 rows. So I think this is kind of an easier way of placing of items, although you can't use this to move your items around a bit and all of that wavy stuff you do with grid column start and grid column rows. But you can place your span your items across multiple columns or multiple rows as it suits you. And you can say span 2. There you have it, spanning across 2 columns and 2 rows. Um, let's see. Right, for item 5, also span 2, just to make our layout to balance up. So that's it for your span. You can span items. You can also span across multiple options. Can be span 3, just to fill it up. And also say and just play around with it as much as you want. So let's get rid of this. Next, we'll be looking at our grid areas. Now, this for me is one of my favorite aspects of CSS grid, because it allows you to play around with your items as much as you want, and it's kind of easy because you just kind of visualize how you want your layout to be, and then you know it's basically like writing out a matrix. Just place your items where you want them to be, and then watch everything come to life. But before that, let's look at our gap in grid. So you can decide to give this a gap, just like it works in Flexbox. It's a 10 pixels, and then just like that, you have a 10 pixel gap separating all of the items. You also have, so this is also short form for row gap and column gap. So you can decide to declare that separately if you want. Let's say a row 20 pixels. Then notice how there's more gap in our row than in our column. So you can decide to declare it as separately or individually if you want. But giving a gap just means 10 pixel separation between all of your items. Now, for grid area, you first of all have to give a naming to all of your elements in the grid in your grid container. We have to give all of them a name. So I'll just quickly do that, and then I'll explain why after. Okay, so we have grid area 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just different namings for all of our elements. So come here. So you declare this by using your grid templates areas, right? Okay, no, not none. So for here we have 3 columns, and we want it to span across 3 rows. So just gonna say and say 1, 2, 3. All right. Right, and just like that, we have placed our items. So 1, 2, 3, 8, 5, 6, 7, 7, 4. And that's how easy it is to work with your grid template areas. So you can decide to tweak this as much as you want, and you can decide to make this one, then like that. So it's with your grid areas, it's pretty easy to just move your items around. You can decide to move my item 8 from here all the way here without having to break a sweat. All I have to do is change this to 3, then just like that. So that's it for your grid template areas. Just makes working with your grid layout pretty much very easy. You know, you move your items around, and so that's it for CSS grid. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video if you find it helpful.